Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm your host Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. We just passed 760 subs. Thank you guys so much for all the support, and I hope I can continue to make great content you guys will enjoy in the future. Now, it's come down to this. The XFL Playoffs is down to the final 4 teams. You have the South Division Playoff Semifinal between the Houston Roughnecks and the Arlington Renegades, and the North Division Playoff Semifinals between the DC Defenders and the Seattle Sea Dragons. I'm going to go over who I think will win both of these games and who I think will be advancing to the XFL playoffs. Now, the first game, we're going to be going over the South Division Playoff Semifinals between the Houston Roughnecks and the Arlington Renegades. Now, the Renegades, they are 4-6, and a lot of people do not think that the Renegades should be in the playoffs, but the way the XFL playoff system works, having 2 teams from the North and 2 teams from the South make the playoffs, instead of having it where the 4 teams with the best records get in. Otherwise, that would have allowed the St. Louis Battlehawks to get into the playoffs instead, but unfortunately they were left home by Seattle in the North. But the Arlington Renegades at 4-6 were able to get over the San Antonio Brahmas, who ended up 3-7. And Arlington last week, they already lost to the Houston Roughnecks 25-9, so this will be a rematch of last week's game, and Arlington already got beat fairly heavily by the Houston Roughnecks, so that's not a good sign for their chances to win this game. But maybe they can regroup and learn from the mistakes they made in last week's loss and maybe be able to beat the Houston Roughnecks this time around. But this game is at Houston because of the fact that the team with the better record, they get the home crowd in the semifinal game, so that's going to be tough for Arlington as well. Luis Perez, he was 22-36 for 205 yards and an interception and 3 carries for 20 yards this past week in the loss to Houston. And Luis Perez, since he came over from the Vegas Vipers, has actually been pretty solid overall for the Arlington Renegades. He hasn't been great, but he has been a quarterback that hasn't made too many mistakes, even though he did have an interception last week. He has been an upgrade over the other quarterbacks Arlington has had this year, but he still isn't playing elite football, and I think that that could hurt the Arlington Renegades in their quest to get to the XFL Championship game. Letty Brown, he had 14 carries for 29 yards. He's a solid running back, but unfortunately Arlington's offensive line has been an issue, and that's another big reason why all of their quarterbacks have struggled this season. And while Letty Brown only had 29 yards this past week for Arlington, he's a better running back than that, but he just was not able to pick up a lot of yards on the ground because of the fact Arlington's offensive line is not great. Brian Herron, he had 5 receptions for 47 yards. I think Arlington's offense is solid, and they could have a lot of success in this game if they're able to find a way to get the ball out of Luis Perez's hand quickly, because if they allow the pass rush to get to him, Arlington's offense will slow to a crawl, and their defense isn't terrible. Their defense this season's been solid overall. I think that Arlington could be able to compete in this game if they make Houston work for everything they've got. But if this game becomes a higher scoring game than Arlington would like, then I don't think that Arlington's going to have much of a chance. But Houston, they're 7-3 this season, and Houston started their year 4-0, and the Roughnecks look like one of the best teams in the XFL, but then they really started to struggle. They lost 3 in a row, but they started to get their act together toward the end of the season to finish with a fairly solid 7-3 record. And last week, they beat the Arlington Renegades already 25-9, so they already have cracked the code on beating the Arlington Renegades. So all they have to do is do what they did last week again, and if Houston's able to do that, they should get this win. And again, it's on their own field, so their home crowd will be very good in this game and definitely will give the Arlington Renegades some fits. Cole McDonald, he was 10 of 11 for 120 yards and an interception last week, and he had 8 carries for 66 yards and a touchdown. He's your prototypical dual threat quarterback, definitely the type offense that Houston wants to run, with a guy that can run the football and throw as well. Cole McDonald is a little bit turnover prone with interceptions, but when he keeps those turnovers at bay and only has around 1 interception per game, he's not too bad, but you just don't want Cole McDonald to start throwing 2 or 3 picks. But he is a really solid runner. Caleb Elby came in, was 4 of 7 for 28 yards, so he had some moments. Brandon Silvers is out. He was the quarterback for the most part for the Houston Roughnecks this season, but who knows if he's going to be able to play at all. He might not be able to play, so it might be Cole McDonald's show. But Cole McDonald has been serviceable, and it does offer that run game that Brandon Silvers lacks. Jeremy Cox, he had 21 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. So Jeremy Cox, he lit up the Arlington Renegades defense last week, and that goes to show you the Houston Roughnecks offensive line is fairly solid. It's not one of the best offensive lines in the XFL, but Houston's offensive line is much better than Arlington's offensive line. And Justin Smith, he had 3 receptions for 51 yards. I just think that overall, Houston has a better football team than Arlington. Their offense is better because their offensive line protects their quarterbacks much better than Arlington's does. Their run game is able to get a lot of success on the ground, and Houston's defense has been the better team for the most part this season than the Arlington Renegades. Houston has had some struggles in some games against some of the better offensive teams in the XFL, which is why they have lost 3 games, but against some of the worst teams in the XFL, they have done a much better job on the defense side of the ball. slowing the other team down. I don't think Arlington's a bad team, and they were very fortunate to make the XFL playoffs at 4-6, but I do think that the end of the line is here for the Renegades, and I think the Houston Roughnecks are going to find a way to win this game on their own field and beat the Arlington Renegades 24-17 to move on to the XFL Championship game. Now on to our next game, and this is the headliner. Everybody's looking forward to this game. The Seattle Sea Dragons, who ended up getting into the XFL playoffs by the skin of their teeth over the St. Louis Battlehawks at 7-3. They're playing the DC Defenders, who are 9-1, and this game is at DC. That's going to be tough because DC has the best crowd in the XFL. And last week, Seattle beat the Vegas Vipers 28-9 to get to the XFL playoffs. And Ben DiNucci, he was 26 of 41 for 339 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 4 carries for 41 yards and a touchdown. That's a very prototypical Ben DiNucci stat line. A lot of yards, a lot of completions, a lot of touchdowns, but also some picks as well. He's definitely turnover prone, but he can be a great quarterback when he is running the football, and he's also a great passer, getting the ball to his receivers, which the Seattle Sea Dragons have a plethora of wide receivers who are really solid, but he still can be turnover prone. But Ben DiNucci, he leads the XFL in passing yards. He is a good quarterback, and I think he could get a look in the NFL, but he's definitely a quarterback that needs to cut back on the turnovers or he's not going to have a shot there. But he has been great for Seattle this season for the most part. Charlie Tomapu, he had 4 carries for 44 yards this past week. Seattle does not run the football that much, but when they do, they are capable of having success on the ground. But their offensive attack is way more aerial than ground, but we definitely know why, because you have Ben DiNucci who can air it out, and Josh Gordon, he had 9 receptions for 115 yards and a touchdown. He's a guy that definitely should get another look in the NFL. And Jawan Green and Ja'Kur Pearson both had receiving touchdowns this past week for the Seattle Sea Dragons in their game against the Vegas Vipers, which they easily beat them. And I think if you look at Seattle, the reason that they are an aerial attack is because they have so many weapons on the outside, great receivers overall, several guys that can catch touchdown passes, and Ben DiNucci is a great quarterback as well. So I think if Seattle can put up a lot of points in this game and do a great job on the offensive side of the ball, I think they'll have a great chance to win. But they're going to have to go on the road with the DC Defenders and that beer snake, and DC's crowd is unbelievable. They are rowdy, they are loud, and they've got that beer snake, and they're going to do everything they possibly can to get their DC Defenders to the Alamo Dome to presumably play the Houston Roughnecks if they do win in San Antonio in the XFL Championship game. The DC Defenders, they're 9-1. They've had a great year, and you do not want to let that go to waste. D'Eriq King, he was 3 of 4 for 33 yards this past week. He's the second quarterback option for the DC Defenders. He's been solid this season, but Jordan Ta'amu is the bread and butter quarterback for the DC Defenders. He was 15 of 22 for 271 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, 8 carries for 45 yards and a touchdown. Jordan Ta'amu, he's a dual threat quarterback that can run and throw, but when the DC Defenders want to mix it up, they can bring in D'Eriq King as well. But Jordan Ta'amu is going to have to play a mistake-free game and play at a high level if the DC Defenders want to make sure they beat the Seattle Sea Dragons. This will not be an easy game for DC, even though it's at home, and you do not want to overlook Seattle. The Sea Dragons are a tough team to beat. Abram Smith, one of the best running backs in the XFL, he had 10 carries for 44 yards last week in DC's win against San Antonio. And that's another thing. DC only beat the San Antonio Brahms 29-28 last week. It's not like the DC Defenders ran away with San Antonio, and they lost to the Orlando Guardians as well. So they flirted with losses a lot of the times this season. So they have struggled in key games this season, but DC is still 9-1. They're still a great team, and they found ways to win, and that's going to be key in their efforts to want to get this win as well, is to find ways to be able to beat teams. And if they can do that against Seattle, then they will be moving on to the XFL Championship game. But they cannot overlook the Sea Dragons. Lucky Jackson, he had 3 receptions for 84 yards as well. I think that DC's offense is fantastic. They have so many weapons on the ground through the air that it makes it tough for their opponents to be able to stop DC. I think Seattle's defense is solid, but they do give up a lot of points in games, so I think this will be a high-scoring game overall because both teams are great on the offensive end, and I don't necessarily think either team's the greatest on defense. Sometimes DC does struggle on the defensive end as well, but I still think that DC, they've been a team that's found ways to win all season long. They're at home. They're going to have their rowdy crowd, and I really believe that the DC Defenders have not gone all this way to find a way to lose and not be able to make the XFL Championship game. I think the DC Defenders are going to find a way. I think Seattle's going to do everything they can to keep it close, but I'm going to go with the DC Defenders to find a way to get a late game-winning scoring drive and beat the Seattle Sea Dragons 35-28 on their own field to move on to the XFL Championship game. So those are the playoff semifinals in the XFL. I'm going with the DC Defenders and the Houston Roughnecks to move on to the XFL Championship game. Let me know in the comment section down below which teams you think will end up winning these XFL playoff semifinals, who you think will ultimately move on to the XFL Championship game, and what you think about my picks for the XFL playoff semifinals. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.